This is Awareness as an Alternative to Abandonment, Critical Notes of Herman Kaplan's The Concept of Democracy, and this is in the Asian Journal of Philosophy. This is by Delia Belleri. So this is a paper about a book. It's on the book symposium, and so it may not present any like strong arguments like one way or the other. It may be a bit of a survey, but I don't mind reading these every so often. Good to learn about what's going on and like, why they write some book. And as always, we get to judge this at the end if we think it was good or bad. So if you stick around to the end of reading the paper, then we do have a emote review where you get to spam emotes in chat, and that gives it a rating, and the rating goes up on a website. If they press you wrong, just say your name is Philosophy Salt Lake, Utah. Okay. Illumin says, completely agree. Just wish philosophy hiring committees would see it that way. Yeah. Well, the state of academic philosophy, and everyone in academic philosophy knows this, it's that you have to be able to sell the philosophy to administrators and other people for funding. You have to justify yourself. And that doesn't always make for the best philosophy, but that means you have to tie your what you're doing to some like tradition or history. And that means you don't get to sleep around because it doesn't look good. You have to be like, no, I'm all the way this way. This is where the research is going. This is the most promising thing. And so it's like when you have to justify it in that way, it doesn't mean you don't get to spread yourself out. You have to be mad focused, because they try to make it sound like science. Like, I'm going to go do all the science. We're going to all the best research in this area. It's like, that's not how philosophy works. So, but that's yeah, not so great. But there's always been a problem with the job of philosophy. Anyway, here we go. As always, feel free to ask me questions along the way. This is my first time reading it. I am not endorsing anything this paper says. I've been suspended from multiple streaming services. I am not endorsing what I'm saying here. I'm reading this and evaluating it for educational purposes. So let me know if you have any questions along the way. I will try my best to answer them. Here we go. In his latest book, The Concept of Democracy, Herman Kaplan argues for the abolition or abandonment of the word democracy, democratic, and germane expressions, which he calls D words. Yeah, so no D. You're not allowed to bring the D here. As well as of the attendant meanings and concepts. He calls this position abolitionism. As provocative as this might sound, Kaplan himself promptly clarifies that his is not an argument against democracy. It's an argument against democracy in quotes, quote democracy, to the extent that this expression and the D words generally show Kaplan takes to be telling the signs of meaninglessness, or at the very least of grave semantic defectiveness. I mean, I take it everyone here knows who Socrates is. What Socrates used to do is go run around and ask people who are supposedly experts about stuff in the world, and he would just poke holes in their definitions until they were like, well, we don't actually know what it is, and eventually everyone got so annoyed with Socrates that they had him killed. So running around saying, well, this big word you all think you know is not really what it is, but you still should be using these concepts. That already is sort of a very weird Socratic thing to do, but is it really a good idea in the end? I'm not so sure. All right. Abandoning democracy and other D words would imply ceasing to use the word mainly in the context of public debates, political discussions, whether theoretical or practical, and media broadcasting for the sake of achieving clearer communication, argumentation, and reasoning. The option of abandonment is deemed superior to other options such as elimination, reduction, replacement, and amelioration. Kaplan especially criticizes attempts to ameliorate democracy by offering stipulative definitions aimed at fixing the expression's meaning. Since all of the potential stipulative definitions he analyzes suffer from significant flaws, this is taken as disfavoring amelioration and as favoring abandonment. Okay, so there is another problem. If you knock one thing down, you need to replace it with something else. What's better? Because people will be looking for something, and people like labels. People like being like, I'm a Kantian, I'm an Aristotelian, I'm pro-democracy, I'm a fascist, I'm an anti-fascist. It doesn't matter what it is. People like it. And you need this in terms, you have to understand, philosophy is like this too. You need pithy statements to have people. That's what gets remembered. what was it? The banality of evil, the line by Hannah Arendt about like the Nazis and everything, that evil's banal. That was like in a footnote somewhere, and that's what everyone remembers. And like the whole book apparently is like, got sophisticated theory and shit. But what's the one line they remember? You need to fucking give it. Philosophy needs marketing. It's meme based. That's why we go over and hang out at Aristotle's, because he's a fucking genius when it comes to like, memes and fucking stuff like this, because philosophy is meme based. You have to remember the ideas. The whole point of philosophy is that it gets ideas stuck in your head. It's just a giant fucking meme. Hey, what's up, Retheus? How you doing? I'm okay. How are you? Yeah. I hope you're having a good day. So, I already disagree with this sort of strategy. Granted, it's very early on in what is getting said here, and maybe Delia Belleri is not fair to Herman Cappelen, but I don't know. But, like, you definitely have to be thinking about marketing when you write your philosophy papers, because if you expect people to read what you say and remember what you say, then that's part of being a writer, and you have to do that. And that's definitely part of being a philosopher if you want your ideas remembered. Just is. I've told this before. When I've written papers in the past, I've actually Googled phrases I've used to see if they show up anywhere else. And if I find that other people have been using a phrase I want to use in like over and over, like to be sort of like important, I change my phrase in my paper. I come up with some other locution so that if anyone hears that phrase, it comes back to me. And that's part of the marketing. Now, is one better than the other? Who knows? Maybe it's like a little different, whatever. I try to come up with something unique so that way if someone Googles it, I show up, not someone else. And Tindarius, I believe, ran some of my stuff through like an AI checkers, and like I came back with the least possible AI checking, like a possibility of being written by AI, because I had purposely, the paper he had run through it, I had gone through my paper and made sure no one had any phrasing like I did. So there is nothing on the internet that I could find that looked like mine. So the chance of AI like rehashing like responses to look like my paper is like slim. So yeah. Stock now says, I don't support this work just from the start. Like, you should be able to use the term democracy. You just have to define that term in your philosophy. Well, this is a question of marketing. Maybe, yeah, you can define things however you want, but that won't change the way people as a society use it. And so, like, you're going to be fighting an uphill battle if you're using the term in a way that no one else uses. So you have to think, is that the battle you want to fight? And I understand where you're coming from, Sock now, but like maybe you have to pick and choose your battles, and maybe this author is right that saving a term as opposed to like coming up with a new one that's a better battle to get people to adopt a new term versus saving the old one. It usually is not. That's not normally how people do stuff, but it might be in this case. Author continues, my aim in this critical notice is to draw attention on a further option which Cappelen fails to consider: awareness. Achieving awareness is less costly than achieving abandonment, with valuable benefits that qualify it as a viable option. My plan is as follows. After summarizing Cappelen's argument for abandonment, I will especially focus on his comparative case, aimed at highlighting the advantages of abandonment and the disadvantages of, for example, replacement and amelioration. Assessing the comparative case, I will point out that Cappelen's proposal overlaps with the alternatives he opposes, thus being affected by their challenges too. I will then present awareness as a yet unexplored option, defending it as a live contender in the range of approaches available to deal with the D words. If anyone asks if you're a god, you say yes. So yes, Bowser. Yeah. Private language argument rears its head. Yeah. You'll be surprised how much that comes up in my thought. Or maybe you won't be surprised, Luminance, but that comes up quite a bit with me. Yeah. The direct case for abandonment, meaninglessness. Oh yeah, you know what we could also do right now? We could give our buddy, let's see if Lumpy is he is still lurking, that Lumpy Dragon Potato. If anyone wants to go give our buddy Lumpy Dragon Potato a follow, he's a Minecraft streamer. He's creating a fantasy world. He's actually quite good at architecture, who knew? But he's also a chemist by day. And so, are you a Democrat? Yeah. I'm in one of the bluest parts of the country, in one of the bluest counties. I'm just like, yeah, of course I'm a Democrat. I'm like from one of the bluest areas in the entire U.S. But like, yeah. So go give Lumpy Dragon Potato a follow. If you want to go chat like intelligent stuff, like I said, he's a chemist by day. He's also been like fixing up his co-op or whatever it is that he lives in, like his house. So he's like, he knows way too much about his condo or whatever. So if you are interested in like adult conversations, in not the sexy adult, well, also he does sexy adult conversations sometimes, but like if you also are talking about like adult stuff, like he's a good place to hang out. Socknuts is like, I look at the marketing issue of people hating democracy comes from hatred to liberty itself. Okay, that's fair. Is that the only reason though? Like, would you accept that there might be other reasons not to like the term democracy? And I'm not saying democracy itself, like the institution of like having the people rule. I'm saying the term. I mean, maybe there's good reasons. But like I said, this author looks like what they're going to do is they're trying to show how to keep the words. So I think the author is on your side here. Okay. The direct case for abandonment, meaninglessness. Kaplan builds a direct case for abandonment of the D words based on what he takes to be indicators of the meaninglessness, or at any rate, great semantic defectiveness of democracy and other D words. Chapter 7 provides Kaplan's perspective on the meaninglessness of democracy, which rests on the following considerations. 1. It seems like D words had a clear initial anchoring in simple cases. For instance, Athens' government in ancient Greece, and then lost their semantic value when there was an effort to expand the extension. This thought is connected with Kaplan's idea that the semantics of democracy should cover at least 4 dimensions, having to do with kinds of decisions to which democracy applies. So K, the quantity of such decisions. Q, the input mechanism, for instance, how votes are cast. I, and embedding, that is, the social, cultural, and historical context to which democracy belongs. E. Okay, I got the label wrong, but whatever. Frank says, like liberty, I like liberty, but I'm not convinced democracy yields more of it. Yeah, I mean, we're always trying to improve on our stuff. What would be better, of course, is the question. Stockton says, I'm just not a fan of degrading democracy. I appreciate that you are trying to save what little we have, because I mean, there's 2 things going on here. There's democracy as it is practiced, and then there's democracy as it is talked about. And what it looks like is going on in Kaplan is that Kaplan wants to radically change about how to talk about democracy, and what you're talking about is like, well, I don't want to hurt democracy at all, and even changing the way we talk about it would probably hurt democracy, like in practice. And so it's like, yeah, but again, that's a question of what's the most effective way to get the liberties that we want. Unreal says the word has a lot of slippage from real direct democracy in Athens. Okay, he's talking about that now, up to, to now when he gets used for representative parliamentary republic. Yeah, but probably true of all political philosophy terms. Yeah, so there's always going to be drift, slippage, all sorts of stuff over time. That just is going to happen. Stockton says even the word itself, because it is just hateful to the Greeks and Romans. See, I mean, so there's a question of how much leeway you want to have. But like, that's right, Sock. Now it's like, how much, like, what do you think is an acceptable amount of pain to, like, get the result? Like, to make any change, to make any progress, you got to break some eggs to make an omelet. So it's like, you got to do something. You can't just hold the status quo and hope things get better. That's not usually how anything works. Okay, so these categories form what Kaplan calls a KQIE structure, the KQI. Okay, in this context, loss of semantic value specifically means that no KQI structure and attendant values to fill such structure for the semantics for democracy was ever fixed when an effort was made to expand its extension beyond the initial simpler paradigm cases. 2. Fixing an extension for democracy and other D words is prevented by the fact that language users exploit the D words for the associations, feelings, memories, and mental images they bring out. 3. Fixing an extension is prevented by the fact that democracy talk is normatively loaded. As there is extended normative disagreement about democracy, this blocks convergence on a shared semantic foundation. Yeah, so this is now we're going into the sociology and the history of how people talk and feel and organize around these ideas. 4. There's a lack of deference to experts when it comes to the semantics of D words. 5. No joint nature seems to be there to provide KQI structure. All these Kaplan clarifiers are pro tanto considerations, and one can only hope for them to cumulatively make up a compelling enough case for abandonment. Yeah, like this is like if any one of them was a problem and the others weren't, so what? You could fix that. But like if so many problems, but I mean, whatever's. Furthermore, since the meaninglessness hypothesis is very radical, Kaplan declares himself open to a less radical, but in his opinion less likely hypothesis, whereby democracy is meaningful, that is, it does have extension, but the latter is either way larger or way smaller than what speakers might expect it to be. That is, either democracy has a very demanding meaning such that almost no organization satisfies it, or democracy has a meaning so liberal that almost every group counts as a democracy. This mismatch between expected extinction and real extinction would still be reason for abandonment. Needless to say, these two would be pro tanto reasons, making for what can only be a tentative conclusion. Okay. Yeah. Unreal says, to reiterate, I don't see his complaints about democracy being different from other political terms, like the current conversation over fascism. Yeah, that's fair. But, like, yes. The question is abandonment even a good idea? Maybe for the other terms too. Maybe we just need to move on. Maybe that is the right solution for some of these cases. Maybe not all of them, but some of them at least. And so it's like, yeah, because this isn't a special term, like democracy isn't that special as you say compared to the other ones, and probably not even linguistically that special in general. But like, why this one? I don't know. But you know, that doesn't mean certain terms it doesn't mean that we would be better off keeping certain terms. Like maybe we would be better off getting rid of some of them. Okay. The indirect case for abandonment, comparing options. Kaplan also makes an indirect case for abandonment which does not hinge on the semantic defectiveness of the D words themselves, but rather on a comparison between abolition and other options, namely reduction and or elimination, replacement, and amelioration. Vesute says definitely not linguistically. Okay. Unreal says, think about the many contradictory ways of using the word liberal. Yeah, that's fair. Yeah, a lot of political stuff. I mean, I know a lot of philosophy terms. Like, yeah, so they all are very loaded. Everything has a lot of baggage. Anything older than, like, you know, even anything 50 years ago has a lot of baggage with it for even terms of, like, new philosophy terms. So, it happens. And, like, what do you do about it? You make up a new term. It's like, there's already too many terms in philosophy. So do you use an old one and try to modify it, or do you make up a new one to, like, you know, so it doesn't come with the baggage? And this is, again, a strategy for, like, what you're trying to accomplish. If you want to hitch your wagon to, like, some big term, well, that's good. You get some benefit, but then you also get the baggage with it. If you try to do something radically new and you don't talk about anything else, well, then no one gives a fuck about what you think. A lot of times you have to make your case very strongly then. And that's just a writing strategy. Either you're in a tradition and then you're part of that tradition. Say you like write a fantasy novel, or you write something else that isn't in like the traditional fantasy genre, but then where is it? And like they're not going to know how to market it. So it is a writing problem in general. Okay. Reduction and elimination pertain to the metaphysics of a certain phenomenon, having to do with whether, for instance, mental states might be reduced to brain states while still existing, as opposed to reduced and eliminated. Kaplan urges that a term's abandonment is independent of reduction or elimination of the related phenomenon. A slur might be abandoned while leaving the metaphysics of its supposed reference untouched. Similarly, Kaplan might say that democracy could be abandoned while leaving the metaphysics of democratic institutions untouched, thus taking no stance on it. Vesute says, one of the biggest issues is the terms get used badly by people that don't get intrinsic meaning. Yeah, well, that's always... Yes, absolutely. People are going to just abuse the fuck out of terms. And, yeah, it's going to happen. Sock now says, this is why I support a study on authenticity in a hermeneutical political theory sense. Like, if we want to be able to have a basis in the tradition. Yeah, I mean, again, what are you trying to do? If you're trying to actually understand what's going on in a certain area, you do need to know what those people think, what is authentic to that discussion. So that does matter a lot at times. Yeah. As it is homophobia, homosexual phobia. Yeah. It's like, yeah, how does that work? It's not the same thing. That's funny. Okay. As to replacement, Kaplan is critical of the very structure of replacement projects. The following formula supposedly captures replacement. There's something S that contains another thing T, and then a third thing R takes T's place in S. When it comes to linguistic expressions, Kaplan wonders what plays the S role. So there's something S that contains another thing T, and the third thing R takes T's place in S. Okay. Could it be an expression's function where R would supplant T in its function playing role? The abolitionist, though, would most likely question that said function should exist or that anything, whether R or T, should play such function. In the case of democracy, Kaplan seems to think that there is no room for a democracy function, as all democracy discourse could be reformulated in terms of more fine-grained and specific properties related to, for instance, decision-making procedures and their mode of implementation, freedom of election, judicial independence, and so on. I'm just looking at the homo-phobia, like the not equal homosexual phobia. It's like, what? I've never even seen the term homosexual phobia before. It's just very funny to me. Like, you're afraid of like the sexual, like same sex of some sex. I don't even get it. It's funny. Language, why? Okay, to pick up one of his several examples in Chapter 9, he considers the debate on whether restrictions on mail-in voting in the Texas GOP voting bill are anti-democratic. In this case, the important question is not, Kaplan holds, whether the voting bill is anti-democratic, is rather whether such restrictions would negatively affect citizens' ability to participate in elections. This question can be asked and tackled without using any of the D words. If so, this indirectly suggests that there would be no space for a D word function. Frank says, I wonder how our dictionary would end up if everyone voted on the meaning of each word. Yeah, I mean, that would be a bad mess. Like, even for common words that people use every day, it would still be a bad mess. Like, let alone words people don't use as often. So, it's like, yeah. As we said, fear, hatred of sameness, fear, hatred of sexual orientation. Yeah. I mean, I kind of, like, put that together. But, like, you know, how that the words don't quite, like, they kind of mean the opposite thing here. Like, I don't know what homosexual phobia, I know what homosexual phobia is by, like, the putting it together. But, of course, homophobia is how it gets used. And it's just, like, it's funny when you put it that way. It's like, yeah, people clearly are just ignoring the root of how it goes together. They use it in however they do. Stockton says, we need an exegesis of democracy, liberalism, conservatism, socialism, communism, fascism, anarchism, libertarianism, rather than just do the work on being a concretized idea rather than this floating idea that keeps getting bashed. I mean, that's a lot of what academics do. They spend time defining their terms so you know how they're using it. Now, are we going to be able to force the general population to do this? Probably not. I mean, you could talk about the education system and like maybe people could be better educated on the terms, and then we'd have a more common basis for discussions in the public sphere if everyone is educated in a more consistent way. That's really hard. Like, that sounds like a good idea, but like it was really hard. Yeah, I got your recipe. Like, they use it the meaning wrong. Now, I'm on the side of things where I'm not going to start policing how people use words. I'm just trying to figure out what they mean usually, because I don't have time to police people's like misunderstandings of what the words should mean. I try to just understand what like they're trying to express at the time, because that's just the way I get through life. I'm not trying to gatekeep on grammar or like correctness or anything. Believe me, my mom, when I was growing up, I got my mom a little sign. Well, it was after I grew up, but it says, I'm silently correcting your grammar. I had to have like good grammar. Well, I had to speak properly when I was younger. So family cared about that. Like my grandma, I was not allowed to curse around my grandma, but if I could, I was allowed to curse if I did it in a Shakespearean manner. So if you want to call someone a dickhead, you could call them a bull's pizzle. I could call someone a bull's pizzle, but I could not call someone a dick. If I did it with the Shakespearean flair, I was allowed to. Now, this was a little tongue-in-cheek. It's not like I was, dealing with any, like, fancy words when I was younger. I wasn't. But, like, they got me, like, they tried to force me to be a little bit more polite. Yeah, the Neo-Greek and Latin combined terms are used incorrectly a lot. Yeah, constantly. But like I said, I'm not judging people on their usage if I can figure out what they were actually meaning. Like, in conversation, not the definitions of the words. Okay. Yeah, so what's going on here is it's saying, like, look, in any one debate, you can say you don't need the term democracy. You can just say, well, what is the best for the people in terms of, like, giving them the most liberty? That you can do. And you can always reduce out the word, like, you can always reduce is what I mean. One word to, like, some other group of words that you can replace it with. You can always do that. I have the ban a word redeem on this channel because I can switch out synonyms on the fly. Granted, I get more and more tired as I stream and it gets harder and harder, but, like, I can usually not say a word on stream. Now, don't redeem it now. I don't do that while I'm doing a paper because it's impossible for me to, like, read the paper and, like, maintain the meaning of the words of stuff I haven't read yet while switching out the words. When I'm talking, I can switch out the words and keep the meaning. That's not the same. But, like, this is the problem. They say, oh, you can just always say what you mean. Yeah, but there's sacrifices along the way. A lot of sacrifices to do that. Okay, as far as amelioration is concerned in Chapter 10, Kaplan argues that attempts at improving the concept of democracy by offering so-called stipulative definitions are most likely doomed. He starts by listing 5 requirements for an adequate stipulative definition. 1. Extinctional continuity, that is, the requirement to not excessively diverge from the concept's current extinction and to not exclusively apply to political structures. 2. Don't ignore the adjective, that is, take into account that a stipulative definition of democracy should allow for a definition of democratic too. This is connected to Kaplan's thesis that what's democratic decision-making, for instance, is more fundamental than democracy. Like, the big whatever it is no. It's what's actually going on. I mean, that makes sense. Democratic voting versus the concept. Okay. 3. Substitutional smoothness. Has it that whatever stipulative definition one gives, it should smoothly substitute democracy in relevant contexts. 4. Avoid massive gaps in determinacy. This is connected with Kaplan's doctrine whereby the semantics of democracy should honor what he calls the kick-weak structure. If a definition ignores the structure, the former will have massive gaps, and that again leads to significant indeterminacy. 5. Respect the principle of lexical neutrality. That is, make sure the stipulative definition does not incorporate normatively loaded features such as fairness or justice. All right, yeah. So you can see there's a huge, like, all of those things sound great, but taken together, it's going to be really fucking hard to satisfy all that stuff. All right, so you can see the strategy. Individually, all these criteria sound okay. Like, you should be able to, like, you don't just use the word democracy, you have to say democratic. Coming for Rawls, yeah. But, like, together, how are you going to, like, formulate a perfect definition that everyone can use, replace all the stuff with, and, like, fit it in? It's impossible. All right. Having provided this list, Kaplan examines 4 potential stipulative definitions to mention, but one he considers David Eslin's definition, whereby democracy is the actual collective authorization of laws and policies by the people subject to them. Unreal says, I believe that the world of our concepts and our language are 3 different realms, each mapping quite poorly onto the others. I know when I raised that in Ivan's stream, he thought you were mad. Yeah, well, I think you have a point there, Brian, because we don't really know what the world is all the time. We have the way we talk about it, that's our concepts. Like, the way we think about it is our concepts. And then the way we express it is somewhere in between. And so it's like what people understand from what we say, which is a public thing, versus what you think you said, your intentions. That's different. And then the way things actually are, like, independent of us, if that is even anything in itself, that could be a third thing. The point is the same. The demo crazy. Yes, that's always the same. We all nuts here. We're all mad here. Democracy, intrinsic meaning. Okay. Yeah, sure. I mean, I don't go personally, like I said, I don't go for the intrinsic meanings because I don't have time to like worry about what. I don't know if it's not where I have time. I'm not personally sold that that's the way we communicate using intrinsic meanings. So you can do that, but like for me, I'm just like, I'm kind of let the thousand flowers bloom. As long as I understand what your point in context is, I don't care if you misuse words. And so I'm not going to like gatekeep on people's usage as long as they're communicating somewhat effectively. So it's like, yeah, I'm just kind of pragmatic about that. Okay, according to Kaplan, this definition violates the extinctional continuity requirement to the extent that it is restricted to political structures. Yeah, so this is it can't be defined just in terms of like current political structures, because then it wouldn't be a general definition. Lumen says we're using usages. Yes, that's right. Okay. Plus, Eslin's theory would build fairness into the idea of democracy itself. It's the idea itself of democracy. See Eslin's passage as quoted by Kaplan on page 165, thus violating the principle of neutrality. The definition would also impede substitutional smoothness insofar it characterizes democracy as an event or state and authorization, while democracies are ordinarily identified with groups of individuals. A definition of democratic would also not come straightforwardly from Eslin's definition of democracy. Finally, the definition would display several gaps as to the kinds and quantities of decisions that belong to a democracy and as to the voting mechanisms. Eslin's definition is thus considered unsatisfactory, as are all the definitions, each for different reasons, pertaining to violations of the 5 requirements above. Obviously, none of these considerations are regarded as decisive by Kaplan. We can at best come up with some concerns that make the proposal seem ill-advised. Yeah. There is also the one man's modus ponens is another's modus tollens. If all definitions everywhere get rejected by Kaplan's like criteria, then maybe that's a good reason to reject Kaplan's account. So Kaplan's like, well, you can't use this to define stuff. It's like, well, nothing good is getting defined in your way, so maybe your account is faulty. So, yeah. I mean, that's kind of how I feel about this at the moment. It's like, there's a lot of smart people out there, and rejecting actually a good idea. Like I said, I'm on the marketing side. You need to get people to be convinced by your ideas, and you need names for that. You need to like have something that will stick with somebody. So getting rid of the title is not gonna, like, I don't think you're gonna get very far. Anyway, continuing. The most important failure in Kaplan's view is that the practice of producing ameliorative definitions for democracy has created an environment in which it is difficult to effectively communicate about this topic due to the massive amount of verbal disputes and faux agreements and disagreements. Since there is no short of a democracy definitions, especially as he identifies them, of the stipulative or amelioration-oriented type, but none of these definitions is satisfactory, Kaplan would diagnose this phenomenon as repeated and mutual inconsistent failed efforts to ameliorate. Yeah. In such a situation, abandonment would be contemplated to the extent that there seems to be no way to adjudicate between mutually inconsistent proposals for the amelioration of the word democracy. Abandonment would be easier. It does not require changing the meaning of an established expression. Secondly, each party to the dispute could pick a lexical item that best suits their expressive purposes. Blah, blah, blah. Furthermore, given the high rate of verbal disputes in such a scenario, abandonment would seem even more recommendable. Yeah, so the whole suggestion here is everyone pick your version of democracy and give it a new name. And then we've got a million little things that are all not exactly democracy. They're all the little things that everyone wants. I mean, again, if you want to gain popularity, you have to bring people in, not break them up. We actually had a very similar discussion a while back in terms of gay rights, I think it was. And there was a question is, do you want to it was like LGBTQIA plus, and did you want to keep adding more and more letters to this? So you're including more and more different peoples basically. Or do you want to just have one blanket term so that you rally everyone around one term, and that way you get the most political support? Or do you want to keep fracturing the community in some by having lots of individual smaller communities? And that's a social and strategic question about organizing people. And you can see the different communities have different like perspectives on this. Like, do you want to just like be more inclusive, have more people just like under the queer flag, or do you want to have like the LGBTQIA? And so this is a strategy for people to decide how to politically organize themselves. I don't have like a particular, I don't know what the answer is to that. People have to pick for their communities. And like, do you want to like lump yourselves together for solidarity, or do you want to break yourselves up to be more individualized? I don't know. But like, that's kind of the issue. Yeah. So it's like, yeah. And clearly, Kaplan is on the, we need more small distinctions, not the big one. All right. Abandonment would offer some advantages and does not appear to pose more difficulties than amelioration. First, Kaplan states a single individual can immediately start to implement it simply by refraining from using democracy. At the collective level, Kaplan envisages two strategies for implementation, producing arguments hoping that people will be convinced by them, and discouraging speakers by making their linguistic behavior costly, for instance through more or less legislated social sanctions tied to using the word democracy. Still, an implementation challenge would apply to large-scale abandonment as much as it applies to large-scale amelioration. As Kaplan observes, though, implementation of large-scale abandonment is neither more nor less difficult than familiar efforts to affect social change. Stockton says, yeah, this decentralized system is so gross. Not gonna lie, like I'm over here with gloves and mask listening to this paper because it stinks like shit, but I am trying to be that biology class and do some dissecting at the same time. Well, you gotta remember, this is also not Kaplan. This is Delia Belleri. Delia Belleri is disagreeing with Kaplan, so the question is this a fair charitable reading of Kaplan? Or is this a straw man, and Belleri is going to then be knocking down a straw man with their own theory coming up? Because that's what's going to happen. That's what they said in the beginning. They're going to give an alternative to what Kaplan says. So maybe by the end you're going to like this. I don't know. All right. Assessing the comparative case. Kaplan's comparative case for the abandonment stresses the limitations of alternatives like replacement or amelioration to highlight the superiority of abandonment. Yet, as I argue in this section, the boundaries between replacement, amelioration, and abandonment are more blurred than Kaplan would seem to represent them. If so, the challenges that affect these options blur as well as importantly touch Kaplan's proposal. Furthermore, the abandonment option itself suffers from limitations that the book fails to properly take into account. Yeah, so Sock, maybe you're very happy at this point because now they're going to start taking Kaplan to task. There is a sense in which Kaplan, too, is proposing a form of replacement. In Chapter 11, he worries about certain verbal disputes, quote, take an author who defines democracy in a certain way, M, and then goes on to talk about other authors, end quote, views about democracy when those authors don't mean M by their use of democracy, quote, quote. He then goes on to cite Cristiano, comparing views with Plato and Hobbes, what appear to be a faux agreement between Przeworski and Estlund. All right, I apologize how I say everyone's names. I'm a dumb American. And the discrepancies between Polity and the Economist Intelligence Unit about whether Hungary is a democracy, all stemming from different characterizations of the term. His suggestion is abandoning D words and finding other labels for denoting the properties and phenomena that political theorists and organizations wish to talk about. Hopefully, please, Athena, save us. Yeah, God from the machine. I ain't got no God I can lower down from a machine. Sorry. There are so many potential words to choose from. Quote, there are so many potential words to choose from, so why do you want to use democracy? It's extremely easy to avoid the problems I have been outlining. Cristiano could have used, quote, equality-based decision-making, end quote. Schumpeter could have used competitive vote-based decision, end quote. The various quantitative measures could just talk about how a country scores on dimensions 1 through n. And that's the end of the big quote from Kaplan. From this quote, it is difficult to deny that Kaplan is not suggesting a replacement strategy. The replacements that Kaplan proposes, though, spark more than one worry. First, the replacement of democracy with other labels might prompt questions whether the labels play the same function as democracy. If they do, perhaps the D words might disappear, but the D word function may not. How should the abolitionists consider the possibility of survival of the D word function? Yeah, so some of the other words will just like step into the role that the D words, democracy words, played. And so it is just ending up to be a replacement theory, even though they thought it was like everyone being, individuals, but some of them, one of them is going to take over and just come back as the revenge of democracy, as it were. Okay, you guys are arguing amongst yourselves in chat. That's fine. As already observed, someone like Kaplan would repudiate the function altogether. They would probably justify replacement, appealing to the idea that labels like equality-based decision-making work because competent speakers would judge on reflection that these labels allow them to better express what they wanted to say all along. This need not involve any function talk. Rasute says, so like law, every writing needs a preamble explaining the definition used in that writing. I mean, and to be fair, philosophy does that a lot too. Like quite often, towards the beginning of the paper, you'll start to see, and by this I mean like this specific definition or this specific formulation of like that term. Yeah. Okay, this move seems acceptable, but it does not go too far. While it seems to adequately justify replacement of one expression like democracy with another expression, equality-based decision-making, it raises questions as soon as one single word like democracy is liable to many replacements, like equality-based decision-making, competitive vote-based decision, and so on. And these replacements can be compared against each other or even just brought together in the same context. This gives rise to the second word, which considers context where what is at stake is comparing or juxtaposing different views, frameworks, or approaches on democracy. Suppose democracy is replaced with equality-based decision-making for some occurrences of that word in a certain context and in a certain text, and is replaced with competitive vote-based decision for other occurrences. Suppose a comparison is performed between these different systems. At some point, the question might arise of what the comparison is about, of what the point is of comparing or bringing together these views. While these questions may perfectly well be answered without deploying the word democracy, it is difficult not to use terms and concepts that are very close to playing the democracy role in that context, so to speak. For instance, one might respond the point of comparing the equality-based decision-making view and the competitive vote-based decision view is to achieve the best characterization of the maximally equitable system in which humans could cooperate. Note the definite description, the maximally equitable system in which humans could cooperate, need not denote democracy. Still, it is difficult not to read the description as playing the role that democracy could play in a context like the one just described. Yeah, so democracy could then just be used as a covering term for this other stuff. And that's an okay use for a word. This actually shows up in logic, where people say true is really just a covering term. That means it's not actually playing any role. It's just saying all the other things that we were discussing are all equally true. So you say like, this and this other thing are true. Okay, then you say this is true and this is true. And that's the thing. Like, well, what are you talking about? They're all sort of like the same thing. They're under the same umbrella. And so like that's what is going on here. Democracy is just an umbrella saying we're all trying to get at a similar an important thing between all of them, whatever that might be. Doesn't need a definition. It's just a covering umbrella for all of these things as trying to get at something. Kaplan could respond that the definite description is defective or denotes nothing. So that is also a way to get rid of it's a nominalism theory where the covering term actually doesn't have a meaning. So that would mean democracy doesn't have a meaning. Also, like being true in those terms, truth doesn't actually have a meaning. It's just a way to bind all the other terms together when you say they're all true equally. Like the sky is green, the sky is blue, the grass is green, and they're both true. Well, when you're saying both true, you're really just saying they have equal truth values. You're not saying what that is. So, okay. Yeah, so it denotes nothing. So it's what's the not nominalism? It's it maybe it's nominalism, but it's basically saying there's no thick understanding there. It's just all sort of, it's a functional term, trying to show that they're all under one umbrella. Okay, so the explanation of the comparison, and perhaps even the comparison itself, is unwarranted. Yet even if the description were flawed, it strikes as intelligible and helpful in explaining the comparison. Plus, the comparison itself seems sensible and warranted. Why throw the definite description and the comparison out of the window just because one's reservation towards D words? The worry is then that getting rid of democracy and germane terms might imply losing some valuable conceptual resources that lie in the vicinity and that play the same or relevantly similar roles as the D words in context of speech and inquiry that, in turn, strikes as fully legitimate and warranted. Unreal says, but you can't be dominant about just one word. It's kind of an all or nothing thing. Yes. That's one of the challenges for nominalism, and people have strategies to like show how this works on all fronts. So it's like, yeah, but like but that would cut the other way, which the author just said, because it says, look, it would have to be all or nothing. And it's like, well, if you just say democracy should be gotten rid of, well, that's unfair because other things would then be a problem too. So it's like, why would you get rid of it? But like, yeah, that's a good point, Brian. Frank says, okay, talking to Brian. Yeah. Okay. Alternatively, Kaplan could concede that the definite description of the maximally equitable system in which humans could cooperate is valuable in explaining the comparison, but that it does not play the democracy role. This is partly true as the definite description does not presumably play the democracy role in general. Yeah, see, again, if it's just a nominalist covering term, it's not playing the democracy role in general, only in that area. If the role is understood broadly as a context-independent function, Kaplan would be right on this score. Yet role is understood in a narrower way here. The question is whether the definite description plays the democracy role in the context under consideration. This question was already answered in the positive in the earlier paragraphs. If so, then the same worry re-arises. Who uses the word re-arises? Come on, I've never seen that before. In the present context, as well as in other similar ones, one may lose the opportunity to employ valuable conceptual resources just because these happen to play the democracy role. Yeah, so again, if you're just trying to figure out the covering theory about what's best ways to organize groups of people, and like that's what you mean by democracy, you're just trying to nominalize out into this other stuff, then it's like, yeah, why would you do that? You'd have to do it for all the things, and specifically targeting democracy makes no sense, especially when it seems like it is doing work to like bring comparisons together. Yeah. Kaplan could react accepting that an expression can play the democracy role in a context as long as it is not a D word, and especially as long as it does not carry the evaluative connotations carried by D words. Yet this reply plays on a fine line, as some democracy role-playing expressions may acquire unexpected connotations and give rise to tricky lexical effects, or some D words might lose their connotations in some contexts. In general, the worry is that banning certain words and allowing others for expressing democracy-related concepts is an unstable strategy, which might need constant reassessment and adjustments to work across contexts. I mean, this is fair. If you try to ban certain words and you say the other ones are okay, the other ones are going to start to take on the objectionable shit that you just banned, because that's how people are. I mean, we were just saying how people, Resute was just saying, I think, earlier, was that Resute? Yeah, someone. Yeah, how we already, the amount of, like, ways people abuse definitions in English is just insane. So it's like, this is going to happen nearly immediately. You ban democracy, you're going to get someone using another term in the same way, and in the same bad way. Okay. Author continues, while these questions remain open, the point I wish to stress is that they do seem to arise for the abolitionist of democracy as much as they would arise for the replacement theorist, to the extent that the abolitionist is targeting D words but not other related words or concepts that are semantically or even causally or historically connected with such expressions, and that are going to play the role of D words in instances of what would have been formerly known as the democracy discourse. And this is what, Unreal Brian was saying. You can't just target one if you're going to do this sort of nominalism. It doesn't make sense. Thus, as an abolitionist, Kaplan faces the problem that a replacement theorist would also predictably face. Yes, yep, Sockdown agreed. Unreal says, I find those words to be much more complicated machines. I have a grounding for my view, having spent time doing graduate work in cognitive linguistics, but it's a contested view. There are those that think that there's a pretty straightforward translation of concepts into mentalese, or that, I don't know what mentates is. or that concepts themselves actually happen in mentalese. Yeah, it's mentalese, which is then pretty directly translated into spoken language on one side and then back again on the other. Yeah, I don't know what mentalese is. That's the problem. I'm pretty on the, like, I don't like talking about that. I don't like trying to figure out what's going on in people's heads. Like, it's just hard. Yeah. So, yeah, I know you write that whole paragraph and then, like, the one important word you fuck up writing, it's like, it's inevitable. But yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it's like, I don't know what's straightforward about any of this. Like, there might be people that think that. I don't find any of this straightforward. Like, even the suggestion is like, well, we should just get rid of some words. The author here is showing you can't get rid of them so easily. You're either going to just you're going to recapitulate or just recreate the situation in one of the things you don't like, or you're just going to get some other problems. It's not such an easy thing just to delete out certain terms that you find problematic. A word that Chomskyan linguists would use, the language of thought, which I think of as pretty literally close to what you think of as language. Yeah, I'm not Chomskyan on this, though. It's like, exactly. It's, yeah. It's like, I don't like the language of thought. I don't really... I think I'm like me and Luminance. I know we're going to be in agreement about this, but I don't think that we have a very good understanding of, even though we say, oh, we know what we're thinking. No, we have some idea of what's going on, but I don't think we actually are, when we talk and like what we're doing actually captures what is going on inside of us. I find this more of like a social practice that we have. We talk about stuff, but that doesn't mean we actually have insight into like what's going on in our heads. We talk about what we are trying to direct other people's attention to and other things like that. What's up, Adam? How you doing? Frank says, I don't think my thoughts are in mentalese until I intend to communicate them. Yeah, see, that's fair. It's like when you are now formulating things for people to discuss, then you actively do things, and maybe that's a bit more accurate about what we are thinking about when we are trying to communicate them than you are putting it together. But like, who knows what's going on before that, after that? It's a mess. You staying George Lakoff on this stuff? I don't know George Lakoff, but okay, good. Yeah. Okay, as to amelioration, perhaps Kaplan can get rid of stipulative definitions for democracy to the extent that he abolishes the word itself. Yet imagine the word gets replaced by other labels such as equality-based decision-making, competitive vote-based decision, and score x1 through xn on dimensions 1 through n. These other labels, being newly coined, will be even more in need of stipulative definitions. The resulting plurality of replacements plus attendant stipulative definitions, though very much look like the output of an amelioration in the sense intended by Kaplan. Yeah. Again, so in deleting it, what are people going to do? They will put all the other concepts of democracy into some other terms, and then it'll just be like, oh, you're trying to replace it with a better term, you're not deleting it, or you're trying to improve upon it. If Kaplan's proposal is indeed this close to amelioration, the quality of the ameliorative labels and stipulative definitions could come under scrutiny. No matter what labels plus stipulative definitions replace the D words within a given context, whether it's equality-based decision-making, competitive vote-based decisions, or something else, one may ask, how can we be sure these alternatives will be any clearer than the original terms? Who's to say the stipulative definitions won't be in need of refinement or sharpening? Consider, for instance, what equality-based decision-making really entails. Why should we assume this phrase is any less problematic than the D words? The key issue is this. While Kaplan claims it's extremely easy to avoid the issues associated with the D words, it seems this assertion glosses over the potential challenges that might emerge when we adopt these alternative labels plus stipulative definitions. I'm finding myself to be very much in agreement with this author here. I mean, I just am. So, yeah. Unreal says, before Lakoff started writing on political topics, his best known book was called Women, Fire, and Dangerous Things. That's a great title. Questions about the labels and related stipulative definitions adequacy could indeed be multiplied. One might object first that there are too many labels whose abundance is unhelpful for the purposes of theorizing and reasoning. Secondly, one could object to the arbitrariness of the new labels and attendant stipulative definitions. Why have those specific newly minted terms with those specific definitions? Why not have slightly different terms with other slightly different definitions? One could press questions as to what these alternative representational tools have in common. Why are they related to each other? Why does it make sense to list them together and compare them with one another? Their point seems to be closely related to how well they characterize the concept of democracy, whatever that amounts to, as well as to uses of the word democracy. If democracy and D words are out of the picture, some other concepts or expressions will have to do the job. Yet, as argued before, these might be regarded as being too much in the vicinity of D words, thus generating doubts as to their viability in their specific contexts of use. What the previous paragraphs aim to show is that Kaplan's proposal blends into the amelioration category and faces difficulties that are characteristic of it, such as making sure that the ameliorative labels and definitions live up to expectations of concept improvement, as well as explaining the specific selection of ameliorative proposals, or explaining what these ameliorative proposals have in common, what it is that they are trying to improve on. Kaplan could retort that his version of... I haven't seen retort in a while. This is just interesting writing. And I'm not tripping up on this as much. I don't know why that is. Maybe this is just better written than some of the other philosophy stuff. But I feel like I agree with this person. So if I'm giving them a pass on anything, call me out, chat. But this writing is actually, I think, as far as philosophy goes, very well done. Kaplan could retort that his version of amelioration is importantly different in that it disposes of democracy and other D words, which are considered to be deeply equivocal on several levels. Even if his version of ameliorative project was beset by all the problems outlined above, the reply might go, it would still be superior to an ameliorative project that were to retain D words. Even granting this reply, though, my point still stands. Kaplan's strategy does seem to have much in common with amelioration, and in virtue of these commonalities, it is not exempted from the demands and challenges that might affect this type of project. I do want to point something out. What was that right here? Yeah. And so, having retort and beset by within 2 sentences of each other reminds me of Sam Jackson in Pulp Fiction. Let me retort. Oh, you're done? You're done speaking? Well, let me retort. And then the quote he has from the Bible is a bad man beset by all the bad things in the world. So it's just interesting that this author hits 2 words used by Sam Jackson in Pulp Fiction within 4 lines of each other. Sockdown says the word is so degraded in the linguistic community and is widely debated, but just because there is debates on the linguistic concept of democracy doesn't mean that we shouldn't use it in our everyday conversation or nor our academic lives. I think that there needs that if publicly or give people the tools of linguistic sociology and the ethics to analyze language, I think we could be in a different position. Yeah, I think that's right. We need more education so people can be more eloquent. It's not getting rid of the words and hoping that somehow the replacement is better, whatever it is. I mean, I think that's exactly it. People need better tools to use, and then they'll be more precise when they speak. Not delete the words and just pray that the solution is better. Okay. Finally, the abandonment strategy has its own drawbacks. One consideration that Kaplan fails to properly address is that it is a measure exclusively concerning the use of lexical items, which does not really guarantee abolition of the semantic role or of the concept of democracy, as defective as these could be. To be sure, ceasing to use the word does go some way towards abandoning the semantic role and concept as well. Yet both may survive abolition of the label and continue to exert their semantic influence through other pathways. Yeah, so there's, like I said, people will just start using, you can't say chess, you say schmess. You can't say this, you say that. It's I'm not touching you, or whatever. You get that close, you be like, well, I didn't say the bad word. I didn't say the D word. I said the CD word. And it's like, yeah, okay. First, it could happen that another word or set of expressions takes over the role formerly played by democracy, inheriting its content no matter how indeterminate, as well as its lexical effects, the rhetorical and emotional connotations associated with it. This type of problem is flagged by Davidson and on the very idea of a conceptual scheme, where he imagines that the Ministry of Scientific Language decides to forbid words that refer to mental states, only allowing words that refer to physiological states. He then wonders how one could prevent the physiological state words from taking on the semantic role of mental state words, thus worrying that abolitioning language does not guarantee the abolishing semantic or conceptual role. As he puts it, quote, "The shiny new phrases, though stolen from the old language, in which they refer to physiological stirrings, may in the speaker's mouth play the role of the messy old mental concepts," end quote. This same phenomenon might also be observed in real life with racist language. Even if the incriminate label is abolished, I have not seen that word, incriminate. This is interesting, I'm learning words here. Incriminate label is abolished, a new and more acceptable label might quickly replace it to express the same old concept and negative attitudes. Yeah, you see this all the time, dog whistly bullshit here in America. An example of this phenomenon is abandonment of the explicitly racist black American neighborhood for the more politically correct but equally lexically connotated inner city neighborhood, as well as similar uses of inner city to substitute explicit racial references. The case of democracy, other labels might take on the positive or negative lexical effects associated with the word. Think of the tyranny of the majority as a possible negatively loaded example. Yes. Alternatively, even if no other expression relabeled the concept might still affect reasoning and communication because some beliefs traditionally associated with it still survive in the mindset of large portions of the linguistic community. For instance, speakers might continue to believe things like power should sit with the people, decisions made by the people are the most just, and so on. These beliefs are as underspecified and even as potentially rhetorically tricky as beliefs wherein the democracy concept explicitly occurs, yet they could very well survive the abolition of D words. If these are live possibilities, Kaplan's abandonment strategy does not offer a clean and permanent way of disposing of D words because it only targets them as lexical items and fails to target their underlying semantic roles and concepts, as well as the belief system that is associated with them. We're getting there, folks. So let's see. We've got... Alright, yeah, we gotta get through most of this. But we're on page 9 of 13, so we're most of the way through. Okay, the unexplored alternative. Awareness. In psycholinguistics, mentalistic awareness refers to the ability a language user has to consciously reflect on and manipulate the structure and function of language. One can exercise one's metalinguistic awareness with respect to phonetics, syntax, and word meaning, as well as pragmatic features of a language. When it comes to democracy, one could argue that the more speakers are metalinguistically aware of the tricky lexical, semantic, and pragmatic characteristics of D words, the better. Furthermore, abandonment should ideally be chosen after consciously evaluating such characteristics, so it should be in the abolitionist's interest to raise metalinguistic awareness before recommending abandonment of these terms. Arguably, though, raising metalinguistic awareness about D words is a separate goal that one could pursue as an alternative to abolition, but also to replacement and amelioration. Yeah, so this is the education option we've been talking about. If people knew what the fuck they were talking about, they wouldn't make dumb mistakes when talking about democracy. They could just be more specific. It is an alternative that Kaplan neglects despite how much it has to recommend for it. Excuse me. In this section, I present awareness as an additional unexplored option whose little costs and valuable benefits are worth considering when it comes to addressing the issue of democracy and D words in general. What would metalinguistic awareness about democracy require? A speaker who is metalinguistically aware about democracy is ideally conscious of its semantic defectiveness and entertains beliefs about it, no matter how rudimentary their semantic theory. Having perhaps considered Kaplan's reflections on meaninglessness, summarized in section 2 above, they might believe that democracy does not have a clear meaning, that different speakers might mean different things when using the word democracy, even within one and the same conversation, that D words generally carry laudatory connotations, and that speakers might use such words just to signal their political allegiance or to convey certain values or emotions. Furthermore, the metalinguistically aware speaker may have developed specific skills as to how to interpret employed D words. Once again, they may be inspired by Kaplan's suggestion above, blah, blah, blah. When listening to D speech, they may A, suspend judgment as to whether the uttered sentences mean anything specific, thus treating the utterances as semantically defective, lacking content, lacking truth value, or B, they may try to reconstruct what the speaker could have meant with those words, bypassing D terminology. And this is what I was saying I do. When people use words maybe not in their like a dictionary defined way, I try to reconstruct what they meant, like why are they bothering to speak, and that's what I'm on this B side of things. All right, so when engaging in D speak, they might A, try to avoid the D words, or B, if using D words were appropriate or inevitable, they might introduce definitions before using the relevant words, or they might warn the audience about their semantic defectiveness and their potential lexical effects, thus partly waiving their responsibility to communicate truth conditionally determined and evaluative neutral content within that conversation. Yeah, so they're giving a trigger warning like, this might not make exact sense, but I'm going to use it anyway to give you a general concept here. And you do see people in philosophy do this. Say, this is not going to be strictly correct, but this will give you a picture of the landscape of what I think is going on. And so then they'll go in and be like, okay, this doesn't exactly mean what I said it was before, but then they narrow down what they mean later. Like they give a overall landscape, like a view that shows the structure of the conversation they want to have. Okay, what would it take to raise metalinguistic awareness about democracy? Stockton says, this is why etymology is important. Yeah, so, again, this is why you have to be able to understand, how to communicate. This is a rhetorical problem. It really is. So etymology matters to that. But, it's a rhetorical question. How do you get the idea across? Is you be very specific, and then you say, I mean this specifically, or you say, I'm going to be a little bit unclear and wrong, but the general structure will hold up over time. Different strategies. Okay, what would it take to raise metalinguistic awareness about democracy? Note that just like how Kaplan holds for abolitionism, awareness raising is immediately implementable by single individuals. In this respect, two strategies run in parallel. For a single individual has some influence on public opinion, such as Kaplan, raising awareness about democracy and related D words might require writing and talking about the semantic and lexical issues of this terminology. Yeah, see, this is educational stuff here. One could write about these topics in academic papers, academic books, but also in op-eds and magazine articles, as well as in books aimed for the general public. Furthermore, one could speak about these topics in academic events, including lectures for undergraduate and graduate students, conferences and colloquia targeted at one's academic peers, events devoted to public engagement, such as speeches, television, radio, and online broadcasts. Kind of like on Twitch. Interesting. More mundanely, if one were not an influential figure, one could bring up this topic in one's ordinary conversations within one's private social circle, with one's acquaintances at work, and in other social circumstances, on one's online social networks, and so on. Unreal says, there you go. I've been thinking that we should be talking about rhetoric. The reviewer is leaning more in that direction, but could go further. Yeah. And I've said this before many times on stream. I think the mark of some of the better writers in philosophy is they get you to think where they want you to go. And then before going there, they want you to be thinking this. And they led up to this sort of thing. And so, like I said, I think the writing in this paper is a bit higher than average for philosophy writing. And so it looks like this person has organized it that they got us to think where they were going and then they went there. So they already got their ideas across. And so there's a higher quality writer, which is unusual. But it happens every so often. There's going to be a bell curve. This person's just farther to one side than usual. Okay, coming to a more detailed cost-benefit appraisal, there is firstly an argument to be made that raising awareness is less costly than advocating abandonment. To raise awareness, one would plausibly need to articulate considerations concerning the semantic defectiveness and lexical effects of D words, making sure to express oneself in a clear and sufficiently engaging way. See? Yeah. Here we go. Clear and sufficiently engaging way. Rhetoric. Importantly, though, one would not need to do more. For instance, recommend any specific conduct, thus articulating further considerations. Raising awareness about D words would thus arguably require less effort than advocating abandonment or replacement or amelioration for that matter. Following Kaplan's methodology, the abolitionist would need to articulate all the semantic and lexical problems pertaining to D words first, and then also make an additional case for abandonment, showing how it is better than retaining the terms at issue, replacing them, or ameliorating them. The awareness proponent instead would only have to perform the first task, seeing to it that their audience are in a good enough position for properly receiving their message. Again, the audience are in a good enough position for properly receiving their message. I mean, this is rhetoric like this is classic rhetoric. How does the audience understand stuff? And you have to coordinate that, like figure that out. Note the first task is something that the abolitionist should also make sure to fulfill. Furthermore, the second task, making an additional case for abandonment, is that one that appears harder to accomplish, for it seems easier to get across information about the semantic and lexical issues of some expressions than to construct a compelling argument for the outright abandonment of said expressions, especially if well entrenched. The benefits of awareness are also not negligible, especially in comparison with abandonment. Up to a point, the awareness proponent and the abolitionist should expect the same results. The abolitionist, however, will expect more than that, but this extra bit is not necessarily desirable. The awareness proponent should expect speakers who are more aware and conversationally responsible, who are mindful of the pitfalls that beset D terminology, that try to either avoid them by avoiding use of the terminology itself, or at least make them known in relevant contexts. The abolitionists should ideally expect a similar level of awareness as a result, but they would have additional expectations, namely that speakers stop using the D words. Yet one could argue that ceasing to use D words is not really a goal to be pursued. As Kaplan acknowledges, quote, implementation of universal abandonment will be very difficult, end quote, because of how ingrained democracy talk is in our politics and culture. This could potentially discourage the theorist with abolitionist sympathies. Furthermore, abandoning D words would imply expressive losses, not impressive, expressive losses. For instance, it would imply being unable to use democracy or democratic to perform certain classification tasks or tasks related to the expression of approval or disapproval in certain communicative contexts. Yeah, and so this was the umbrella classification stuff to show these are all going together. And so that was the nominalism stuff we were discussing earlier. Like, you can definitely use it as a umbrella term to like describe a group of things. For instance, in the context of education, it would be more difficult to make comparisons between different forms of government from the past or between past and present forms of government. Conveying certain civic values to children or to people who come from different backgrounds would be less straightforward without the aid of D words. D words may be semantically underdetermined and unduly normatively charged, but they still may carry a heuristic utility, or in Kaplan's words, serve good coordinating purposes. For certain tasks geared towards effective communication, it is not clear that giving them up would improve our cognitive life and communication. Thus, while it is reasonable and desirable to wish for speakers who are more about D words, something that both awareness theorists and abolitionists would want, it is less clear that it is reasonable and desirable to wish for the abolition of D words, something that only the abolitionist would want. The abolitionist may object that keeping democracy would still expose one to the risk of miscommunication, verbal disputes, and exploitation of lexical effects. Yet note that the awareness proponent is not urging to keep democracy at all costs. They leave it open whether democracy should be used in all contexts, admitting that in some circumstances it might be more advisable not to deploy this terminology. The awareness proposal stresses a speaker's freedom of choice when dealing with such a delicate terminology. As long as the subject is cognizant of the risks and inconveniences that come with using D words or with being exposed to the use of D words, it seems reasonable to leave the decision as to when and how to use this terminology how to use this terminology to them. Consideration of the speaker's freedom of choice is certainly a benefit that Kaplan's abandonment proposal does not clearly offer. And I mean, from my perspective, there's certain words in philosophy that I absolutely hate using. I think they're abused terms, and I basically have stricken them from my vocabulary. Once in a blue moon, and I can't even tell you what they are because that's how bad I strike them from my vocabulary. Something like supervenience, I never use it, except in what referring to other people. And I never use it ever as a term I want to use. Unless I'm like talking about something else. But like, I've had to use some of these terms before and I can't even remember the example. That's how much I've struck these from my mind. Like the word robust. Yeah, if you don't like it, you don't like it. Don't do it. But like, that's a good one because what does robust mean? I never use them. I can't even remember them because I've really stricken them from my vocabulary. I've had to use them once or twice, but the ways when I've used them, they are like fully defined and they are completely nominalist. They could be defined in terms of other stuff. It's just for rhetorical effect. And so it's like I have used a few of these terms and I remember someone called me out like, oh, you use this big term. I'm like, yeah, but I used it in a very fucking specific way that I can actually explain to you why I used it. And that's the only reason I used it, because it was the right word in that one spot. Otherwise I would not have used it. It's like there are still like rhetorical and like, you know, social effects that you have to consider when being a writer. And like, so sometimes that one word is not being misused in that one context, even if it's misused in all the other ones. And what's up, Disillusioned? How you doing? Luminance says, I feel that way about qualia. Yeah, well, I don't have any reason to talk about qualia, but like, yeah, that would be another one for me too. Like, I hate supervenience. I hate using qualia. I hate, yeah, I can't, like I said, I legit have stricken these words from my vocabulary. So, and there's a lot of, they get called weasel words, I think, in philosophy sometimes. And I mean, you can see why. It's like, as Disillusion said, oh, this is a robust theory. The fuck does that mean? You like it? That's why is it robust? Is it a strong theory because it has a lot of support or something? Well, if it's strong and it has support, you say it's a well-supported theory. You don't say robust unless you just mean that and then you're using it for rhetorical effect. But if you're not meaning just has like a lot of support, then what do you mean? And it's just a weasel word to make it sound good, but it doesn't actually do it. What's the topic? Abolitionist? No. So the question is, Maddie, and how you doing? I hope you're having a good day. Herman Kaplan, who's a famous philosopher, is calling for the abolition of the word democracy, saying we should replace it with something else. And this author is taking Kaplan to task here. They're saying, even if it was a good idea, it would like, even if we were able to like say we don't want to use democracy in D-related words in general, there's no guarantee that something else wouldn't just like take its place. Doing the same bad things that Kaplan doesn't like, because you know, it's underspecified what democracy means. It's got a whole lot of baggage, so that sort of stuff. Yeah. Sockno says what they say in linguistic, skunked words. Interesting that they use skunked. Yeah, that's a much more fun term. Yeah. So, but we're almost done here. We're on page 12 of 13. Oh, we're on like, yeah, we're at the conclusion at the bottom of this page. So what this author has suggested is that what we really need to do is get people to recognize the way that the words democracy and democratic and related words are unclear or vague, so that when people use them, they do use them in more effective ways and not in the bad ways. That way people can choose good uses and then use a different word. If you're going to end up using like democracy in a vague term, well, then use something more specific. That's what's going on here. And so they're calling this awareness raising. You have to get people to be more aware of the vagueness or ambiguity of certain terms. And that would be a way to prevent those terms from being abused. Okay. The abolitionist could retort that it is unclear whether ordinary speakers would be able to exercise awareness in this way. So they're saying that's too much work for the ordinary person to understand how to be clear. Most ordinary speakers are barely aware of what they are saying, let alone the semantics and lexical effects of the words they use. While it is undeniably true that the levels of metalinguistic awareness of ordinary speakers for D words might be dramatically far from ideal, the fact that they would be non-ideal is not an argument for not trying to raise metalinguistic awareness. Hey Shane, what's up? How you doing? You think people would have the capacity to mean the same thing when they use the politic words? Nice, yeah. Ha 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 ha. How you doing? Oh, and literally they just said people don't have the capacity. Nice. Yes, exactly. It's like, this is very fun. Anyway, if anyone here does not know our good buddy Shane McGinnis, we should go follow Shane McGinnis immediately. Shane teaches history and sociology, has fun streams talking about history and sociology, and has been recently doing a series on government and power and like the history of like, you know, how governments have and wield power. So it's like interesting in the modern times to look at the history of this stuff in the contemporary, like with the contemporary lens. So good dude, go give him. And he also does Gundam builds and like history of Middle Earth, Tolkien stuff. So good times. So yeah, I mean, this is, so Kaplan's basically calling people stupid, and this is, I think, unfair. And the author is clearly disagrees with Kaplan. People want to be clear. They want to make their point. So if like they are misusing terms and then like they start to see that, they will like start self-correcting. Of course, as we were saying at the beginning of the stream, no one likes to be told that they're misusing terms. But like if they do start to realize that they're not being clear, no one likes being unclear when they know they're being unclear. That's not how people are. So if they are able to start to understand when they're being unclear, they will start to be like, they will try to make a better point. Okay. Yeah, just because things aren't ideal. Like, we live in a non-ideal world. It's not an argument for not trying to get people to be better. Okay, this even holds for the proponent of abolitionism. Pushing for abolition without raising metalinguistic awareness first would fail to appreciate the epistemic autonomy of speakers. Yeah, so yeah, this author, I have to like really hand it to them. I feel like they've been hitting most of the arguments that I would raise here. And so, yeah. Yeah, Shane says, I'd argue that people want you to think that they think the way you do when it comes to politics. Vagueness is part of it. Yeah, but as long as the point, at least from the philosophical perspective, is, are they making the point that they want to be making? And if you show them that democracy and related words are unclear, will they at least be effective in their bullshit? We're asking about the effectiveness of words here, not whether they are politically using it in the right way, which you probably are more concerned about. We all should be more concerned about. But like in terms of philosophy, we just want the semantic accuracy here. Shane says epistemic autonomy is such a great term. It just makes sense. It makes me feel Kantian. Yeah, it's fun. Like I said, like I've been very impressed with the writing in this article, which is not something I say as much as I'd like to. Yeah. Okay, you're talking to Shane. All right. Ceteris paribus, it would be better for speakers to make an informed choice as to whether to delete D words from their vocabulary, or as Shane was saying, purposely use that ambiguity to their benefit, if that's what they want to do, if they're jerks. If so, raising metalinguistic awareness should be an aim for both the abolitionist, who might push for total or extended deletion, and for the awareness proponent, who might leave it to the speaker's discretion to decide, irrespective of how non-ideal metalinguistically aware actual language users might be. Finally, the abolitionist could point out that metalinguistic awareness is not observable. The implementer can never be sure whether they succeeded in making their audience aware of the relevant features of D words. While awareness as a mental state is private and therefore metaphysically inaccessible by other minds, there are many ways in which one can ascertain it. One can observe behavior. Does the speaker have with respect to D words as a metalinguistically aware speaker? Or ask the interlocutor to confirm uptake, for example. While these may be fallible indicators of metalinguistic awareness, they are nevertheless acceptable. Further, analogous points about lack of observability hold for the abolitionist as well. Suppose a speaker stops using D words, thus behaving in what Kaplan would consider like a virtuous way. Just witnessing a person who fails to use certain words does not mean that the person is acting intentionally or for the right reasons. Furthermore, the abolitionist has access to the same response mentioned before. While omissions are opaque, one can always gather evidence that they are intentional or motivated by the right reasons, or observing consistent behavior, querying the speaker, and so on. If anything, the limits imposed by lack of observability affects the abolitionists just as much as the proponents of mental linguistic awareness. Plus, the lack of observability can always be overcome by both, albeit partially and defeasibly. Okay, conclusion. Herman Kaplan's The Concept of Democracy presents a provocative argument for abandoning D words. While I haven't questioned his direct case for abandonment, resting on meaninglessness considerations, in this critical notice I focused on his indirect case for abandonment, mainly based on a comparison between abandonment, replacement, and amelioration. Assessing the comparative case, I pointed out that Kaplan's proposal overlaps with the alternative he opposes, facing similar challenges. Furthermore, abandonment does not guarantee that abolitioning the relevant lexical items will lead to complete abandonment of the related concepts, as semantically indeterminate and rhetorically tricky as they might be. I then suggested considering awareness inspired by metalinguistic awareness as characterized in psycholinguistics, as another option for dealing with D words. Awareness involves becoming conscious of the issues with D words without fully abandoning them. It is less costly to implement than full abandonment while providing valuable benefits. For instance, honoring the speaker's freedom of choice when it comes to evaluating whether the use of D words is appropriate or not. Okay, thank you for sticking that one out. I think this was a while. It was a little longer than I expected, but wait, we got through it. So now what we do is we rate the paper. We have our emote review. If you are in chat now, you are welcome to use the emotes you see below and on the screen next to me. So if you thought this was, these are better TTV emotes, everyone's welcome to install the better TTV extension or one of like the 7-zip Frankerface or whatever, 7Z ones. Like they all work, I believe. And so you're free to use them. And, if you thought this was fun, made your brain dance, give it a brain dance. You also can use the emotes multiple times and adds it up. Now, if you think this had existential or artistic drama, so maybe some social theory in there, Nog Scream, Ouroboros for deeper ancient ideas, Nog Knife for slicing and dicing arguments, Nog Navel, navel gazing only for academics, Nog Turd, all style no substance, don't poop underneath, Nog Grapes for big claims that shrivel up. You can also use the global vote yay and vote nay of Twitch, and also my vote meh. Note, I calculate an overall score on these papers. Anything in the green makes the score go up, anything in the red makes the score go down, and the vote meh actually makes it go towards the middle. So, thank you, Adam tuned in and K-Pars. Adam gave it a yay and a brain dance. K-Pars gave it a knife and a vote yay. Yeah, I'm feeling the knife. Like, I felt really cut up Kaplan's arguments here. Like, they did two things. They reduced Kaplan's arguments to the things that Kaplan criticized and directly criticized Kaplan's arguments on those grounds. So it's like they really sort of took him to task. Aris, thank you. What's up? Thanks for rating. Yeah, so it's Sock now. Thank you for rating. So knife and a yay. Yeah, so I mean, I'm feeling like that's kind of how I'm going with this. Like the argumentation I felt, and I said this multiple times during the paper, was on point. Like we were commenting, I think, was it Brian was commenting that like we were getting to the rhetoric and that Brian was thinking like, this is where it was going. And so it's like, I said this before, if you are thinking this is where the argument's going and it just leads you right there, it's like, yeah. Aristotle's pretty cool meta conversation about any program of linguistic revision. Yeah, thank you for the review, Unreal Brian. Brian also says, I appreciate the reviewer. Kaplan strikes me as very narrow-minded, either by nature or for the purpose of his work. That said, I would have liked to see the reviewer take an even more zoomed-out view than they did. More important, I think much more emphasis should have been taken on the difference between problems and ambiguities in the language in general versus democracy in particular. Yeah, that's fair. They were clearly focusing on Kaplan's book and the arguments made in it. But like, yeah, I mean, this person clearly knows what the fuck they're doing, I think. And so it's like, I bet they've done this in other stuff. Like, this Delia, whoever they are. So like, they definitely, like, they have this, they have this other paper. I know you can't see it, but like behind, I'm looking at the, they reference the forthcoming paper of their own, And like they have a paper on metalinguistic awareness out there, so they clearly know what they're doing. Luminance, thank you for the knife, appreciate it. So I'm gonna give it like I'm gonna go double knife, I think, on this nog knife, nog knifey. I'll give it a Was this like fun ideas or no? You know, I don't even. It was a fun paper. Like, did it have any like fun ideas? I'm trying to like think. Like, I'm not sure. But like, definitely a bunch of knives. Thanks for the shout out to Lumen's Bloom. Vote. I'll give it a vote yay also. Why not? I'm gonna double knife it. That's how I'm feeling. Cost, what's up? Look, the whole stream, I heard about 2 words. I'm okay with abstaining. GG though. Thank you, Cost. Thank you, yeah. So yeah, this was a good paper. Like, at least chat seemed to like it. I liked it. Granted, I know I can affect chat by being like, oh, this was good or bad, but like, yeah. So yeah, Delia Belleri from Instituto de Filosofía. This is Spain. Good stuff. Yeah, so if anyone else wants to get their review in, now's the time. And last comment, Rod Durden gave it a mat and a knife. Fair enough. I mean, you could actually argue this is a bit navel-gazy also, because who is actually considering deleting words out of our vocabulary? Like, is this seriously going to be taken up? It is a symposium article on a book symposium, so I was like, I can get how you might not love this. It is kind of like narrow in their focus. And I mean, Brian said that too. Lumen says, I like the paper. I was listening while walking around Manhattan, so it was kind of coming out of connection. Haha. There you go. Hey, you know, it's the weather in New York is actually not that bad tonight. It's like a little rainy, but like it's not that bad, so it's a nice day to walk around Manhattan. That's cool. Adam says, my idea, suppose 2 parties understand the sense of a word, both having read a dictionary definition of the word senses, so that both parties understand how a sense is being used. Yet, now suppose a party denies that sense used in a meaningful description for a particular specific word is unrelated. In that case, education isn't the issue, appears to be an agreement issue about what words can have, or used in talking about topic. It gets tricky when a word is common, used by non-experts. Yeah, that's fair, but there's a reason why I was just saying, like, you know, this is a little navel-gazy because this is for people who care about defining their terms when they speak. And who's going to be that way? It's not your average person that's going to be like, and this is what I mean exactly by this term. This is kind of an academic-y oriented paper. And so, like, yeah, Adam, I agree. But in practice, you're going to be speaking with people that you, like, assume you're having something in common, or you try to figure it out. You try not to speak cross... I can't even think anymore. Speak past each other anymore. Or if you're in an academic setting, you define your terms. Yeah, but I mean, I'm not in Manhattan, Brian. Shane says, plenty of people right now are interested in deleting words out of our lexicon. Plenty of people. Yeah, the best people. Adam says it gets tricky when a word about meaning itself is about signing an agreement itself. So yeah. Yeah, well, again, there's an assumption, and Shane brought this up earlier. Not everyone is speaking in good faith. If anyone else wants to get your rating in, now's the time. Not everyone's speaking in good faith. Some people are trying to be unclear. Some people are trying to abuse the language. And this paper isn't directed at them. This is directed at people that are trying to, you know, be communicative and helpful and all those things. And so the idea is that you want to get people to realize that certain words are easily abusable and they should be clearer when using them. Yeah. Shane says, now everyone's going to do a 3-hour show on what fashion is so that everyone knows what they mean when they say it. Yeah. This is the thing. It's like there is the things used to mean, there's the historical definitions, there's like the social definitions, and then there's like the popular definitions on how things are getting used and what are you trying to accomplish. And as I was saying earlier, I'm just trying most of the time to just figure out what people mean in the context. And so where are you coming from and what can we actually do with it? Is that the best thing? Maybe I'm a little too laissez-faire with this, just like letting everyone go. People should get it right, but you know, I got a job. I go to work. I'm not going in there and be like, you know, philosophically that your semantics is bad. It's like no one gives a fuck. Like that's not helpful to the work.